everyone. Today we are talking about comparison and contrast grammar. This is the first unit in our comparison and contrast grammar. We're in Unit 5 in our Purple Grammar and Beyond book. So at the beginning of Unit 5, you see that we will talk about identifying relative clauses, which is what we have been talking about in our class, comparatives with as, and some common patterns that show contrast. If we zoom out a little bit, this first part is about a comparison and contrast essay. It talks about different ways that you can organize your essay. You can look at different topics and then some of the examples. It also talks about thesis statements and things like that. So go ahead and take a look at that. This second section is about identifying relative clauses. We have spent about 2 weeks on this, so I'm not really going to go through it. It again reviews some of the identifying relative clause pronouns that we can use and whether it's a subject or an object. It also talks about whose, and it also reminds us of why we use an identifying relative clause instead of non-identifying. And that's at the bottom right here. It talks about the use, and we have been talking about this a lot lately, so we're not going to go too far into this, but quickly I'd like to take a look at their explanation. Use identifying relative clauses in comparison and contrast writing to provide characteristics or information that show the differences between the elements that you are comparing. For example, if we look at example number 1, my friend who lives in Boston always remembers my birthday, but my friend who lives in New York does not. In this case, we have two different friends, and we've got friend who lives in Boston compared with friend who lives in New Jersey. I didn't tell you their names, so this information is necessary, it's required. It helps us identify which friend we're talking about in the first part and which friend we're talking about in the second part. Another example is some people like to play games that involve competition, while others like to play games that encourage collaboration. In this case, our comparison is between games, and some people who like this and other people who like that. So we're looking at games that involve competition as one item compared with games that encourage collaboration as the other item. These are both identifying adjective clauses because we need this information to determine which kind of games we're talking about here compared with which kind of games we're talking about here. So identifying relative clauses can be essential in our comparison grammar. If we zoom out, these are all exercises about identifying relative clauses, and we have done a lot of that. If you want more practice with identifying relative clauses, this is one of those practices where you combine sentences, so it can be a good practice. You're welcome to do that on your own, and I can check it for you if you want, but we're not going to look at that in the video. Looking at comparatives with as. Now, before we start looking at this, you'll notice that in the assignment on Canvas, I attached a page that says Unit 5 Grammar Notes. You're welcome to print out this page and follow along, or you're welcome to take notes on your own paper. While I was previewing this chapter, I looked at the beginning of the chapter, which said we're looking at comparison and contrast grammar. Well, I know I'm going to get some grammar for comparing and some grammar for contrasting. Comparing means similar, contrasting means different. So, comparatives with as, I put in my chart under similar because I know the meaning, but we can also look at the explanation. Writers show similarities and differences in comparison and contrast writing using as. Some people think that youngest children might not be as mature as their siblings. Sometimes younger children do not get as much attention as their older siblings. If we look at 3.1, as can be used in the following patterns. As plus adjective or adverb as, or as plus noun phrase as. If we look at our examples over here, we actually have 3 examples. We've got these 2 lines right here. These are both one example. So the sentence is, youngest children are not as independent as their oldest siblings. So in this case, we're comparing youngest children with older children. And we're saying that they are not as independent as. If we look at example number 2, an only child socializes as well as children with siblings. And in this case, I'd like you to add something into your book. Right now, we are comparing only child with children with siblings. And we're talking, but this as well as is not about only child as well, because well is talking about the action. They socialize well. So actually, I'd like you to add right here, I'd like you to add the word do. This will show us that we're looking at only child socializes well. This is our number 1, our first thing that we are comparing with. You could also write something like, and children with siblings also do. These 2 things say the same thing. This one uses our as well as grammar. But because we're looking at child socialize, we need this do verb here to hold the place of the verb. The first part is how the child socializes, so the actual first thing in our comparison is this child socialize. It's not child compared with child, it's how they socialize compared with how they socialize. And this book does not have this do verb here, but it actually makes your comparison more clear, because you might want to make a note, and you can make a note anywhere you want. As well as can be comparison, or and. Sometimes we can say, I like chocolate as well as cake. That means like, I like chocolate and I like cake. So if we do not have the do here, it looks like we're comparing socializes and children, and that obviously does not work. So this do is actually very important to hold the place of the verb, so we have good parallel structure, which would be child socializes and other children also socialize. You could even say the same verb again, but to avoid repetition, we just have this do verb after it to hold the place of the verb. So please add that into your book. We're also going to add it onto our notes page. An only child has as many close friends as children with siblings. And in this one, we're comparing the number of close friends to children. I'm sorry, one child close friends number with the other children with siblings close friends number. And so here we have our as many close friends as children. So we've got our as on the sides, and we're looking at close friends, and we need some kind of modifier here, like as quality of close friends, as interesting of close friends. So you need a modifier here, some kind of quantity or an adjective plus a noun phrase if you're going to use this style. If you're going to use this style, you need an adverb, and then it's telling you about the way that this verb happens. Or you can talk about their actions, and that is are not as blank as. So you need a be verb before it plus as plus adjective. So we're going to take some notes on this. We're going to look at the form. It tells us that there are 2 forms. And I'm going to write it as 3 forms because for me that's pretty necessary. So be plus as adjective as. That's one form. We can use verb, right? Subject before the verb, always, of course, but if we're just looking at this piece of grammar, verb plus as, adverb, as. And actually, in this one, I'm going to move it over. I'm going to say subject plus verb plus as, adverb as, and I might put a little chunk right here, as, adverb as, plus another subject plus verb. So we've got 3 parts here. And this is that extra do verb that I was talking about. Usually we just put a do there. And then the third one is, you need like verb like have or contain or something, plus as, plus noun. And it could be a noun phrase. It can be an adjective plus a noun. It can be a noun plus of plus noun. It can be all kinds of different nouns. So I'm going to actually write noun phrase here to help us remember that it can be a complex noun plus as. Oops, maybe not a plus there. That's not how I was writing. So we've got 3 different kinds. You've got be plus adjective. We know that adjective almost always needs a be verb or some kind of stative verb. We've got a subject verb, as, adverb as, plus a subject verb. And you've got a verb, as, noun phrase as. Obviously, you need a subject before this verb and a subject before this be. But this one, I think this is really important to show that you're contrasting these 2 actions. Or you're comparing these 2 actions, not 2 things. So this one, I added that extra subject verb. The meaning, in our notes, we'll take a look. As can also be used to compare quantities, as much attention. That's the same as this one. Not as many advantages. Same one. If we move down, using as, use as in the following ways. You can emphasize 2 equal elements, are just as. Or you can show that 2 things are slightly unequal. That's almost, nearly, not quite, as, or not nearly. You can emphasize a big difference. So in my chart, I put similarity. As means as means same, similar. If you say that she is as beautiful as her sister, that means both sisters are beautiful. If you say she studies as effectively as her roommate does, that shows that both students study effectively. If you say she has as much integrity as her best friend, that means both people have integrity. So as means same. That's the meaning of the grammar. Now, obviously, if we add in extra words, as we can see down here, and we say something like almost, that means not same, it means almost same. Or if we say nearly, it means not the same, it means nearly the same. Or if we say not quite as, it means not the same, it means not quite the same. So these kinds of modifier words are common with this, but they are not part of the grammar. They change the meaning of the grammar because of the meaning of these words, but they're not actually part of the grammar. If you say not as, that means not the same, which also means different. So if we're looking just at the grammar by itself means same. We can make a note here that something like not as equals different, because it's not same, not the same. And this should actually be over here. Not the same. So those are my notes. Try taking some notes. If these work for you, try it out. If they don't work for you, you don't have to write them, but we're going to move on. Let's take a look at this one example. on page 71. Here we see a chart. We're using as comparison. We see middle children are not as responsible as firstborns. Here we have firstborn children, very responsible. Middle children, somewhat responsible. They are not the same. So we use this grammar to compare middle children and firstborn children. And we have a be verb. And then we have as plus adjective plus as. And in this case, they are not equal, so we need to put not. If they are the same, then we take out the not. So as tells us equal. If they are not equal, we add a not or any of those other words that show not equal. You can go ahead and try to do this activity by yourself if you would like. We're moving on. The next part of this chapter is common patterns that show contrast. Contrast means differences. So we can use as to show similarity. We can also use not as to show different. But that's because we put the negative, so it means not the same. So this grammar means the same, it shows similarity. It can also be used to show differences, but there's some grammar that only shows differences. So we're going to look at some of these different types. We've got some different patterns. Again, these all have the same meaning, but we're looking at the structure, the form, so that we have different options to say the same thing, but with different grammar. Let's take a look. A common pattern with the noun difference is the difference between blank and blank is. You can also use it after the be verb. And you can say blank and blank are the differences between blank and blank. If we look at our example over here, we've got one significant difference between youngest children and their older siblings is that youngest children receive a lot of attention. So here, if we're looking at this is our, it's actually our subject. So we've got one significant difference. This is our noun. Difference is. And then we show that we're comparing between youngest children and older siblings. So we need this part between blank and blank. We need that close to the difference because it's actually telling us more about the word difference. And then we've got our main clause be, and here we've got a that clause. What is this doing? Is this an adjective clause or a noun clause? It's a noun clause because it's working as the object in our sentence. So I'm going to put this right here. This is our object in our sentence, and then this right here, this whole thing is our subject, and the root of the subject is the difference is. So obviously you can use different adjectives. You can say one amazing difference, one impressive difference, one significant difference, one incredible difference. You can put whatever adjective you want here, but the main part of this grammar is difference between. So we're really looking at difference between. Difference between is a collocation. Difference between is not an optional. You cannot say difference about. That doesn't work. So it has to be difference between. And then you need the two things after it. If we look at be, I'm going to zoom in a little right here. If we look at be, a common pattern with the verb differ is noun differ or differs from noun in that. Let's take a look at the example. The results of current research differ from earlier research. So here we have our comparison. We've got this differs from this. In that, blah, 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 blah. In this case, we've got a noun clause working as the object of this preposition, and it's giving us more information about the ways that they differ. The results of current research differ from earlier results. So this is actually, by itself, it's actually a sentence. The results of current research differ from earlier research, and I'll cover up this little last. That's a sentence, but we can add this prepositional phrase after it, and then add a noun clause, as the object of the preposition to give us more information about the ways that we differ. This is a complex sentence, and this is a very common way to talk about differences. So in this one, we're looking at a noun. In this one, we're looking at a verb. Let's keep going. So we've got differ from, in that. And this is our verb. Difference between is. So we've got three main parts. We're looking at these pieces, these chunks of language. You kind of want to work on remembering them together. The more you use these, the easier it will be to remember them. Don't be afraid to say, I can't remember if it's difference of or difference between. Just come back to the book. Open it up while you're doing your writing. Common expressions and patterns that are used with in contrast. We have two different kinds here. Let's look at the second one first. So we've got number 1 pattern and number 2 pattern. Number 2 pattern, what is that? What kind of grammar is that? This is a transition word. It follows the same rules as all transitions. It's easy peasy. Capital letter at the beginning of the sentence, comma, and then you have your sentence after it. We can look at this example over here, which is our number 2 example. Many children without siblings receive a lot of attention, period. In contrast, children with siblings often share their parents' attention. Okay. If we look at example number 1, we've got in contrast to. And this actually has kind of a strange function. This is a prepositional phrase. It kind of looks like a transition, but it has a phrase by itself. So it can go at the beginning of a sentence, in contrast to noun phrase, and then something. But you have to make sure that these two things here are not the same noun. Right? So your subject in this cannot be the noun that's here because it needs to be something that's different. So whatever you're comparing has to be the subject here in this next one. Let's take a look at the example. Maybe that'll help a little bit. If we're looking at example number 1, we've got in contrast to traditional American families. So this is the first thing that we're looking at. The Chinese have had several generations of one-child families. We're looking at traditional American families compared with Chinese, and this says contrast. The word contrast actually means different. So if you don't know that word, you might want to make a little note. You cannot use the word indifferent to. It doesn't work. That's not how our grammar works. This is a fixed phrase. You cannot change it. It's kind of like on the other hand. That's the way we say it. So we say in contrast to. But whatever your contrast is, whatever the two things that you are comparing, one should be here and then your other should be here. These two things cannot be the same. They must be different. And you want to make sure that you keep the focus of your main clause. If you're talking about Chinese families, you want to keep the Chinese families in the main clause. If you're talking about both, it doesn't really matter. All right, and a common pattern with adjective unlike is unlike blank, blank. Unlike works a lot like, it works very similar to this in contrast to. Whatever you have in your first noun cannot be the same as the subject here. Let's take a look at the example. Unlike firstborn children, so we're looking at firstborn children as one thing, youngest children are generally very creative. That's our other thing. So here we're comparing firstborn and youngest children, and this word unlike means different. That's the meaning of the word. But it has a little bit of a different grammar than the word different. So in all of these cases, we're looking at many ways to show differences. They're all different words, they have different grammars, and it makes your sentences more interesting and complex. We're going to take some notes on this. On your notes page, we've got the difference between. We've got the difference between plus noun and noun is. So your important parts are the difference between. You have to have the word the. You have to have the word difference. It can be singular or plural if you're talking about one or more difference. And you have to have the word between. You have to have two things. It can be happy kids and sad kids, so you can have modifiers on these nouns, but you must have nouns. And then you need the verb be here. If it's plural, then you need are here, obviously. And then you list your differences after. I'm not going to make a note about meaning or use because I think it's pretty clear. Sometimes we need some information, but the word different is here, so we don't need to make any notes. Differ from. The form is, I'm going to check, blank, blank, blank. Okay, so we've got subject plus differ, and I'm going to put a little S here so we remember we might need to put an S there, from object in that, plus subject and verb, because this is a noun clause over here. So something differs from something else. This is our comparison, and this is actually a sentence by itself, but if we want to make it a more interesting, more complex sentence, we will actually add this in that, and that prepositional phrase is giving us more information, and then you can put a whole sentence after that because this is a noun clause right here as the object of this. Again, we have the word differ, which means different. It's the verb. So I'm not going to make a note right here. Or maybe I'll make a note about differ is verb form of different. Different is an adjective. Difference, and actually maybe I should write the whole thing here so that we see that it's the noun form. You have to have the difference. This is noun form, different is adjective, and differ is the verb. All right, in contrast to. In contrast to and unlike, on my notes page, I'm going to make a little arrow here that shows that these two are similar. Same form. In contrast to, we're going to say in contrast to thing one. Whatever your first thing is, comma, and then you've got subject plus verb, and I'm going to make a little note. This needs to be thing two. So these two things, these two nouns cannot be the same because they cannot be the same word because you're comparing two things that are different. The word contrast means difference. So in the meaning, use, other, I'm going to make a little note. I'm going to say contrast. I'm going to put it in quotes because we're talking about the word equals different. In contrast, difference, we need a noun form. That's the meaning. You cannot change the words because the word different does not work in this phrase. But the meaning is difference. So that's our meaning. And then I'm going to maybe make a little note right here. These nouns must be different. I put thing one and thing two. In the book, they have noun phrase, independent clause, whatever you want to put, however that works for you. But I like to point out, because sometimes I see students, they put two of the same things here. They say like in contrast to humans, humans something, and that doesn't work. So these two nouns have to be two different things, the two things that you're comparing. In contrast, this one's pretty easy. I'm just going to make a little note. Works as a transition. We have talked about transitions, so I'm not even going to make a note. If you want to make notes about what a transition does or how to use it, you can make notes. But we've talked about transitions. As long as you know that this is a transition, I think you already know how to use this one. And we've already got the note contrast means difference, so you could write it again if you want. And then the word unlike works the same as in contrast to. So we've got unlike plus thing 1, comma, subject, verb, and this subject has to be thing 2. It cannot be the same thing as thing 1. Unlike, the word unlike means different from. Like, not the same, right? Unlike. They're not like each other, right? So again, if we wanted to do a practice, we could do a practice. Let's take a look at the last one. This last example. I like this last example. So for homework, I would like you to take this sentence. Unlike firstborn children, youngest children are very creative. I'd like you to take it and I'd like you to change it, transfer it into all of these different grammars. Same sentence, new grammar. Same meaning, new grammar. In this one, you don't have to use synonyms because we're just practicing with the grammar. I'd like you to focus on the grammar. So if you want to use the same words, that's fine. We're going to focus on the grammar for this practice. Take this sentence and change it into these different grammars. Let's make sure that we understand the sentence. We're comparing thing 1 with thing 2, and then this is our information. Are generally very creative. So when you change this into the other grammars, you want to talk about firstborn children compared with youngest born children. I will see you